Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Amy Klein. I am a lay leader here at Temple Emanuel, and I'm a Hartman board member. And I'm very proud to work with Hartman's Boston professionals, Josh Levison, and somewhere, Jesse Steinman. Hopefully you guys have all met at least one of them. Apologies that Wes isn't here to greet us all tonight. He was called out of town to a funeral, and if he were here, he'd be welcoming you, and he'd be introducing Michelle, his colleague, his beloved colleague, and Donniel, his beloved rabbi. So you're stuck with me. Sorry. Donniel, your first visit to Temple Emanuel was in 2010. And since then, you have been inspiring us with your Torah, with your wisdom, here in Newton and in Jerusalem, year after year, as a group of us from Temple Emanuel has come to the Community Leadership Program. That was a little plug. On the back of your program, there's something about the Community Leadership Program, CLP, happens every June, unless there's a pandemic. And we'll be going there again this summer, June 25th. More on that to come. Mostly I'm here and I'm proud to be welcoming you, Donniel, because we love having you here. Because of you, we are a Hartman synagogue, and you inspire us every day. Your last visit to Temple Emanuel was unbelievably on day 122 of the war last February, and today, frighteningly, is day 424. Since October 7th, you've been the voice of the war for us from afar on your podcast with Yessi, for heaven's sake, keeping us connected, offering us hope and a positive voice, reminding us of the moral aspirations that we have for Israel, talking about values that perhaps not everyone is ready to hear about at the moment, but that are especially important during this extremely difficult and challenging time. And we are most grateful for the ability to learn with you here tonight. For now, I'm just going to turn to Michelle, who has the privilege of interviewing Donniel, asking questions of Donniel, and time permitting, we'll have questions from the room afterwards. We'll see how it goes. We never know with Donniel how it'll go, but no. But presumably you have a lot of wisdom to share, and we're looking forward to it. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and Donniel. Thank you so much, all, and you especially for being here.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you, Josh. Thank you to Hartman here in Boston, and to all of you for joining us today. Donniel, you have been on the road, and I wanted to ask you, in this impossible, heartbreaking time, how is your Neshama? Let's just start there.
How's my Neshama? I don't allow myself to ask that question all the time. You just got to do. It's just a very difficult, it's been this crazy year, but it gets difficult for different reasons all the time. Like, if it's the same thing, you learn how to adjust, but it keeps on changing on you. The challenges keep on changing on you. I think I'm okay.
Which is maybe perhaps the best any of us can say.
Yeah.
Well, with your permission, let's dive right in. Your most recent, for heaven's sakes, podcast starts with you using a very non-standard word, warful. You say that Israel is feeling warful or has been warful. What did you mean by that word when you used it then? And especially today, do you still feel what you articulated in that podcast, that mood can shift now with the negotiated ceasefire deal with Lebanon? And more generally, how are Israelis encountering this ceasefire there? Is there a sense of, as you had started out that podcast with Dayenu, like it's a start? Or are you seeing more folks who feel, as your podcast partner, Yossi Klein Halevi, was articulating, more skeptical of motivations, more concerned, more reserved? Welcome to Temple
First of all,
Emanuel.
I just made up the word in the middle of the podcast. It wasn't planned. And it turned out, by the way, that Yossi was wrong. It actually is in the dictionary.
I saw it.
It's in there. It's just not exactly the way I intended it. I meant warfulness as a psychological mode of being. And I'm spending a lot of time watching Israeli society, feeling Israeli society. And, excuse me, we're stuck. We are in a very, very stuck place where people who love Israel and care for it are in for a seriously challenging period of time. Israelis are more different than you than they have ever been since I've been watching. And I've been watching consciously since early 1980s, when my job was to start watching, and I was aware. We're just in a very, very different place. I used to think that our denominational differences were what really separated Israelis from North American Jews. Denominations, liberal denominations, synagogue experiences, nationalism, nothing. Nothing. Nothing could compare to the deep psychological, emotional, and ultimately now, as a result, come ideological gaps. I don't know if you've ever felt warful, maybe post 9/11. But right now, Israelis don't know how to stop being warful because conceptually, they don't know of another option right now. And Lebanon hasn't changed the psyche of that conversation. And there are groups of politicians who are working very, very hard to make sure that we don't have another option out of warfulness. Because at the end of the day, they know how to do warful. Even Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid are trying to out-warfulize Netanyahu. They're not offering a different vision, a different path forward. They're not. So, the only shift that I feel is that there's some relief.
You see that?
I see, listen, of course I see it. People whose children and spouses aren't in danger in Lebanon right now are breathing. They're breathing. Gaza is this perpetual engagement, but right now it's not really a war zone, it's an occupation zone. We've shifted from war to occupation in Gaza. And the level of troop activity and casualties are in accordance to that. But I think Israelis don't know what they're supposed to do. Maybe a little anecdote. I started recently a new research group at the Hartman Institute. I'm not doing a commercial now for the Hartman Institute, even though I might, but that's not really what I'm doing. That wasn't the purpose. Really, it's not. I realized that we have to review all of our Torah. Not our values, but how we communicate our values to Israeli society. And just like many of you experienced personally the byproduct of our I Engage research seminar, which you don't know about, but it's a group of about 8-10 people who've been sitting for 15 years, 3 hours a week, thinking about how do you talk about Israel, Zionism, liberal Zionism in a North American context. And much of that Torah I've been translating to Israel and to Israelis. And I realized, maybe a little late, but you can only know what you know when you know, that's not working anymore. And that Israelis are at a different place. And I said, okay. And one of the features of the Institute is that all of our educational programming is the byproduct of research teams. And we could change what we teach across 20, 30 platforms within a month. And what we teach now is not what we taught a month ago. It's hard to work at the Hartman Institute, but it's, so I convened this group, and I said, the purpose of this group is to now ask, what are the major questions that we have to ask, and how do we respond? And Tal Becker, who co-runs this seminar with me, said, let's start with peace. Like, why can't we talk about peace? Why have we lost that ability? And one of our most senior left-wing leaning scholars, and each one, the task was, bring a major source that you have that could enrich our conversation about peace. The way you want, the way you're thinking about it, ways in which you think it might be helpful to enable Israelis to think about it. And this person, I won't mention his name because he didn't give me permission to reveal this, he said, when I start thinking about peace, my immediate association is a nightmare. Just hear that for a second. I'm not critiquing anybody, he says, my immediate association is a nightmare. Every time we try, Israelis die. So that's where Israelis are. And so we're not warful because we love war. We're not warful because we want to kill some more people. There is a segment of Israel, very small segment, not an insignificant segment, who are ardent ultranationalists. Some of them are even fascists. And the correlation between ultranationalism, power, and war are very, very, the correlation is very intimate. Ultranationalism is about parading power, using your power, killing. It's a different modality, and we have some very small, very, very small. One of them happens to be the Minister of Homeland Security. But leaving that aside, you don't encounter many Israelis who are bloodlustful. But warfulness is a mode that you can only stop when you think that there's another possibility forward. And they don't see one. They don't see one. Maybe we'll get into it. There's a whole coalition of people who don't, for different reasons. But principally, they still believe that most of Palestinian society, particularly in Gaza, would do an October 7th again if they had that ability. So the whole idea of negotiating a peaceful solution is just incoherent to them. So you're sort of stuck in a certain place. And how you get unstuck, at least they don't yet know how. And so what you have is an army which, without announcing and without declaring that there's a clear shift, has moved from trying to free the hostages, because we know we can't do that, to just occupying and creating a new status quo. Basically, a status quo similar to what we had on October 6th, but with more hindsight and hopefully more foresight. A status quo that we think could be sustainable, and sustainable just means that another October 7th won't happen. And we're sort of stuck there. And there's ways forward, but that psychological modality is very, very dominant across Israeli society. And that means right, center, center-left. The left has left. There is no more left. There's about 15. But
So I want to follow that up, because a while ago you recorded an episode as a solo episode, and you called it What I Knew, Know, and Don't Know. And you explained that initially you believed that the wars that Israel is engaging in were just wars, and that you continue to believe that, of course, Israel has the full right and responsibility to defend itself, but that you're not sure how much longer we can claim that these are just wars if they can continue on indefinitely. And so I want to just follow up with you there and hold there on Gaza itself today, because you said just now, and you've said recently in regard to the continued war in Gaza, that there's a sense that people have that we need a total defeat of Hamas. And you said that there are a group of Israelis who are looking for a resolution that we can't find. And you said it's time that you need leadership to offer people a new direction. So I want to ask you, what did you mean? What does that leadership look like? Can you say more?
Okay, just for the record, first of all, thank you for listening. And thank you for listening so carefully. My mother usually calls me, or she used to call me a week after each podcast to talk, because that's when she would listen to it. And I said, that's what I thought last week. But in this case, very different from Lebanon, where I initially felt very uncomfortable, and then I learned that I was wrong, and I ultimately embraced everything that the army was doing as thoughtful, measured, necessary, and an expression of Israeli society's moral right to defend itself. And the war ended before the just war mandate concluded. Right now, personally, I don't believe there's any moral justification for us continuing our operation in Gaza. None. And in many ways, the army is more or less doing exactly that. It's shifted to occupation mode until the government, because that's not the army's job. We're a democracy. The government has to decide policy. The army is not engaged in significant military operations in Gaza right now, other than very, very extensive building. You all know and see and have heard. We are in occupation mode. But there is another way. And that other way is not being pursued. I'm not talking about another way. I'm not that Hamas is just embracing, and I'm not speaking about hostage returns, and there's calculations that are beyond my pay grade, and I don't want to pretend as if I could tell you. I don't know. And whether some continued pressure is going to help with the hostages or not, I don't know. I tend to be a little more skeptical. But there is no future for an Israel occupation of Gaza. Yossi, he feels this. He wants to talk about it again tomorrow when we tape the podcast. He sees the forces trying to resettle Gaza as dominating Israeli political conversation right now. I don't share it to the same degree, but we achieved whatever, to continue, like when you realize, and when you go, there is, for those of you who speak Hebrew or read Hebrew, there's a very lengthy article in Ynet today, analyzing all the multi-dimensions of the Israeli operation in Gaza. And it's interesting because throughout the war, we've very rarely been given a picture of what Israel's doing. The level of reporting from the battlefield throughout most of this war has been sparse and incomplete, and we Israelis know much less than we ever knew. This gives you a whole detailed picture. I don't know how you say ugda, chativa, and gdud in Hebrew, in English, excuse me. But I don't know which one is a battalion, a brigade. I have no idea. We have 3 ugdot in Gaza right now. Does anybody know how you say ugda? A battalion?
Platoon?
A battalion? Okay. And there's 3 battalions now operating in Gaza. And it just details what each one of them is doing and how they're doing and what's happening. And I think it's time.
So, question though, because you just said that there are people having a nightmare of peace.
They're having a nightmare of peace, and
what's
part
the
of what,
option?
and part of what's, and again, we're not talking about it. Certain parts of the world are, a little less are. If you actually look at the amount of space where our army is operating, and you try to realize what is the life of 2 million people who are about to go into winter, what their life is like, why we can't enable them to move back to the north, I understand. If you want to keep on attacking with precision, whenever possible, different forces of Hamas, you want to keep the civilian population as far away as possible. I understand that. But at some point, if you're not successful, and this article outlines how Israel is now basically confronting 15-year-olds. You have to realize Hamas, by hijacking the humanitarian aid funded by the world and selling it, are making hundreds of millions of dollars every month. That's what they're doing. They're hijacking the aid. They're hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. I saw an estimate of $500 million every 3 months. Huge amounts of money. Again, I can't put it. They have more than enough money to offer 15-year-olds to 25-year-olds jobs. And they just need a couple of days to train them on a Kalashnikov, or for them to be able to operate. And they're replenishing their forces on an ongoing basis. They don't have any shortage of forces. And this article is outlining in each place what's happening. And so at what point, and the army at least says, if we are going to destroy Hamas, it will take years, not months, years. Now, I just ask, is there a different way? And I believe there is one.
So that's what I'm asking you.
That different way has
see?
been put on the table 8 months ago. I'm not saying that was the time to implement it, but it is time to find some aspect of the Palestinian Authority, give them the tools, give them the forces, together with international support and a pan-Arab army with them, to move into Gaza and to take political control of Gaza. Militarily, Hamas doesn't have its power. Its army of 15 to 25-year-olds with machine guns could terrorize, and they basically are running the political infrastructure of Gaza still. We can't do that. So if we're not going to do that, who could do that? Is it a perfect solution? I don't know. Just, you have to try it. You should try it. Let's try and see if we don't have another group who, from the inside, could constitute an administrative authority who will replace Hamas, who will distribute humanitarian aid, who will feed people, who will oversee the $200 billion that it requires to rebuild, which Israel doesn't want to spend a penny. And by the way, Trump doesn't want to spend anything either. He doesn't. That means it's going to have to come from Arab countries who are only going to do that under certain circumstances. So there is a conversation. You all know it. I've been speaking about it. The press has been speaking about it. President Biden has been speaking. These aren't news. Is it a perfect solution? There is no perfect solution in my neighborhood. All there are bad choices that you have to try and maybe turn them into viable solutions. And so there, at least one solution is to say, yes, withdraw. Now, your army doesn't seem to be able to exert a sufficient amount of pressure on Hamas to cause them to break. We have, after 424 days. And if you think about it, where are the hostages? Where are they? How many kilometers of tunnels? They're not in buildings because there's very few buildings left in Gaza. So after all these months, they're probably in a certain area, and this is what this article says as well, where the Israeli army has decided not to operate. And Hamas has thousands of terrorists there, and we're not operating there because we know the minute we operate there, whatever hostages are alive will be murdered. So we can't go in there. So then what are you going to do? So we thought, you'll kill Sinwar, they're going to collapse. They're now going to be weak. I haven't seen it. So maybe there's another way, and that other way is having 10, 20, 30,000 Palestinian, Saudi, Qatari, Moroccan, Egyptian, international force moving in, constituting a police force. Disarm. They're creating the pressure to disarm, having all the money, instead of Hamas being the only one with money, have them have the money to distribute aid, to give jobs. Maybe that will create a different dynamic. Do I know for sure? No, but I think for every parameter, politically, morally, public it's time.
So, as somebody who thinks deeply about spiritual issues, how would one cultivate the spiritual and emotional sense of security that would enable such a vision to begin to be constructed?
I'm trying to figure that out in my own little space, because my space is education, and I reach hundreds of thousands of people. For the last year, it hasn't been very successful. Personally, it's been hard for a lot of Israelis to hear things that I want to talk about. It's hard for my staff to teach it. It's been a struggle. It's not and I understand, it's been a struggle. And I'm trying to figure out ways. So, for example, when you speak that you use the term morality, it doesn't work. Bad term. Morality is not a good term. Compassion? There's no compassion. There's absolutely no compassion. maybe values, talking about, and I was recently meeting with one of the heads of an Israeli party, and he also was trying to speak security, self-interest. I said, if you want to speak about security, Netanyahu's going to out-security you every day of the week. I said, you have to speak about, our moral responsibilities. He says, what are you, crazy? Can't speak about moral responsibilities. But maybe, and so in that conversation with him, he said, we have to speak about interests. So I said, what about our interests in who we are? Compassion for Gazans, it's just not going to happen. But what about some compassion or some commitment to who we want to be? And so I'm trying. But here, not everything, education has its strengths, and but it also takes time. And so I do believe that there are going to be certain political processes which are unleashed on the Middle East, which can and will be helpful. I don't believe Israel's ability to completely act independently and in isolation from the opinions of most of the world. Now, if acting in that way was the only way that we keep Israel alive, I'd say that's what we got to do. That's what you got to do. But if that's not the case, I think other options are going to be put on the table. And then the educational process. But literally, I'm sitting and teaching rabbis and teachers and scholars and social active. All the time. I'm talking about this to thousands of people, tens of thousands, and not just me, my staff too, to try to begin that process. The only place where that compassion still exists is for the return of the hostages. 70% are willing to stop the war to return the hostages. But many of them then say, let's return them and we'll go back in. It's not a peaceful thing. The majority of people who vote for the opposition, something about 80%, are coming out for stopping the war. But of those who support the coalition, it's only 30% who are for stopping the war for the sake of the hostages. The majority of people who vote for the coalition are willing for the hostages to die.
So let's dig in there, because just this week we saw that just absolutely anguishing video of the hostage, Idan Alexander. And I'm just curious, you in your last podcast really sort of cried out, why isn't everybody screaming about this? And here in America, we feel it as kind of a never-ending gut punch. We're carrying around this deep sense of existential grief with us in every moment. And yet, it seems to be, for at least some portion of Israel, that they're characterizing the hostage situation as either political or more in Yossi's image of the sort of permanent bad news. We don't want to go there. How is Israel grappling with this hostage situation that continues and continues in this moment? And most people feel the government could do more to bring them back. Is there an upswing in folks who are screaming, as you implored us to do?
One of the strange things that we're trying to get to adjust to is, and you know something of this, how everything is political. Science is political, facts are political. In Israel, everything has become, and it's part of the way in which the government is trying to deflect criticism is by making everything political. There is no substantive argument which they have to deal with anymore. All they have to do is critique the messenger. And the messenger could be the Attorney General, the messenger could be the press, the messenger could be the head of the security forces, the messenger could be the army. Anybody who says anything that doesn't support the current coalition is the enemy. And, truth be told, some of the hostage families, after 3 months or so, shifted to a very, very strident critique of the government. Not a critique of their political, a critique of their failure. And after 424 days, but somewhere in 300 or so, the government shifted and made the hostages also a political issue. And if they are anti-Netanyahu, anti-government, and you saw a couple of months, they started responding to them differently, shouting at them, treating them differently in the cabinet, in the Knesset. They became part of the left wing, because anybody who's not me, that's also one of the terms. You're part of the radical left. And so they're part of the radical left. And therefore, their voices don't penetrate into the soul of most of those who support the coalition. They don't. So you can wear your pin, but the reality is they don't. And in fact, the majority of those who support the coalition are not willing to stop the war for the sake of the hostages. It's just what's there. And so some of them couch it in security terms, and it is a legitimate position to claim that the 50 or 60 who are alive, we cannot stop the war to save their lives if the consequence is going to be a greater security danger for the state of Israel. And then there's issues of what price we'll have to pay, who we're going to have to release to get them back. All of these are now partisan. Everything has become, there's no issue that transcends. Now, it does transcend right-wing, left-wing divides, but because now the anti-government forces have a very strong right-wing component to it. I don't know the difference between Gantz and Netanyahu on almost any issue. So it's like I haven't heard him articulate. Personally, I believe he's still trying his hardest to convince 3 people to leave the Likud to vote for him. That'll be his great success. So you don't feel it. You don't sense it. It's become very, very political, and some people are screaming. The families are screaming. But after 400 and screaming, your voice gets, at some point you just get used to people screaming. The demonstrations have lost a lot of their energy. They don't have a moral voice. They have a very anti-Netanyahu voice, which then gives legitimacy for it's like both sides are playing in this strident partisan atmosphere. And and these people are just, we're screaming a little, some of us, it's a very bad place.
So can we circle back to your sense of sort of what the Institute can do? What's your role here in this moment? You're working with the podcast, of course, and you're going out and sharing your thoughts and your voice and your analysis of the situation. But the Hartman Institute was initially really focused on sort of long-range, deep thinking projects, right? What would Judaism look like in many years from now, and how do we plant those seeds? And as you shared tonight, there was a huge pivot that almost feels like you're sort of changing what you're looking at week by week by week. And so I want to ask you here, what do you today view as the mission of the Hartman Institute? Do you see it sort of as a think tank, as a yeshiva, as a bridge between Israel and American Jews, as a force?
Thank you. So first of all, thank you.
How do you see it?
Right. See, the mission of the Institute hasn't changed. Our core mission is very, very basic. Our mission is to try to elevate the moral and spiritual commitment of the Jewish people in Israel and around the world. Our mission is to deepen pluralism and the commitment to Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. And our mission too is reimagine the relationship between Israel and world Jewry. Those are our three things: the moral and spiritual life of the Jewish people, pluralism, Jewish democracy, and peoplehood, world. That's what we wait. That's still our commitment. Just how we do so, what programs we need to do so. How do we talk to people about these issues?
Well, and with the headwinds,
like what do you do? It's like it changes. You like in North America, you can't talk the same way we could talk 20 years ago. Or in North America, we shifted our focus from 50, 60, and above. Most of our work in North America now is 15 to 25. So we spend like $10 million on 15 to 25-year-olds. That group, you have to speak very differently. And one of the differences between 15 to 25 and 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 is that 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 have more patience. Paradoxically, they have more time. Think about it for a second. They have more time. They're not leaving Israel. They might be troubled, but that you have time. The 15 to 25 are deciding whether they're in or not in. They're deciding, and it's not self-evident. They're not going to be anti-Zionists, all of them, but they have to decide whether Israel's going to be on their radar screen or whether it's too much of... There's an Aaron Kodesh here. I remember the last time there was some criticism. I won't certain words. I'm going to be really good tonight, Amy, I promise. It's just not as pleasant or as valuable to them. And so how you speak to 15 to 25-year-olds. But the same thing in Israel. A number of years, 2 years ago, I announced to our board that we're not running, that most of our activity is not going to be a marathon anymore. That we have to learn how to run a 5K or a 10K. That we have to start thinking about 2, 3, 4-year impact programs. And that's what we're doing. And so we're not a think tank. We never were. We are an institute guided by, at the focus of the institute is this idea-generating community of about 70 people whose job it is to ask, what are the important questions facing the Jewish people and how do we respond? But those ideas then get translated into tens of programs. So whether it's our rabbinic school here or our rabbinic school there, each one of them is affecting hundreds and thousands of people, whether it's teachers, whether it's social activists, whether it's principals, whether it's lay leaders. What is it that they know? And we're trying it. But part of what we need to do right now is over the next year, our most significant challenge is to recruit an army.
What do you mean by that?
I had an army, but my army's not sure they want to be with me right now. I have to recruit 1,000, 2,000 change agents who are there, but just deep down, it's more dormant. Not in North America. In North America, there's a difference. But in Israel, I need to recruit a whole cohort of people for whom values, Jewish democracy, pluralism, human rights, human life, peace, were an essential part of their lives. But since October 7th, they've been so traumatized they just can't think about it. How do we help them? Like, that's the long-standing PTSD. There's a moral, spiritual PTSD in Israel. And how do we get people to reclaim it? And our team is trying to find out, how do we do it? And you start with the low-hanging fruit, but like, for example, I'm not trying to reach the unreachables. I'm not trying to reach across the aisle right now. I don't have the time or the luxury to do that. And that's not of great value, to create dialogues between the extremes. Right now, I need an army. And so I'm building it. I'm recruiting 100, 200 social activists in their mid-20s, rabbis, teachers, seeing who's ready to march. Then with their help, our methodology is never to try to reach the masses, it's to reach those who will reach the masses. So right now we're in that, that's a major focus, and it's happening, but it's going to be slow. Israelis are going to take a long time to heal, and I have to be much more patient with them. It's far harder for them than I assumed, and I'm there. It's not like them. Us, it's very, very deep. And you see it all across the age groups, all across the political horizon. And in that sense, they're very different from you. Not that you're not committed to Israel's survival and security, but there is a certain place for a value consideration, which is integral to your Zionism, which Israelis they're just not there right now. And so I'm in that process of trying to recruit those few thousand and to begin that fight, yeah.
So it would have been hard to imagine sort of more distance being created between the American approach to our Jewish life and the Israeli approach to living in Israel, being there now and understanding the world. But you're articulating tonight that divide is almost like a chasm, if I hear you correctly. So my question for you is, in this book that you wrote here, Who Are the Jews and Who Can We Become? You have this paradigm, you have a narrative of Genesis Jews and Exodus Jews, which you explore throughout, and you say that we need to be together in a community, that being part of one community, although you do acknowledge that it is a stretch, it's difficult at any point in time in history to say that we are one, and you explore what does it even mean to ask that question. You also say that it's critical that we are part of one endeavor here. And so I want to ask you, do you see this Genesis, Exodus paradigm as a way to kind of hack the divisions that we have between us right now in the Israel-American diaspora today?
I hope so. The publisher just contacted me and asked if I'd be willing to do an update. I said, could I please do an update? Because this came out right before, and major parts of it have to be rethought because things have changed. But that model of Genesis and Exodus is a model which was still, again, you always want to be suspicious of ideologies that survive over time. Like, you always want, you worry, like I worry about whether I'm really listening or not. I think I still am. And one of the advantages is I don't hold my book in high regard. Like, I guess I think it's a good book, but like, I'm not, no, like, I don't think that's, the whole world is going to, like, I don't hold either myself in that. So, like, I am a little more open to criticism about it. But the Genesis-Exodus model says that first and foremost, an integral part of the Jewish people is not what we do or what we believe, it's who we are. And you felt that's what October 7th crisis activates Genesis modality. In my book, I belittle it. That's what I have to rewrite, is the impact of anti-Semitism and crisis and war. I thought that was yesterday's conversation. This was more a positive embracing of the family of the Jewish people, rather than the crisis that activates it. But the Genesis model is alive and well for major parts of the Jewish people. It's one of the most beautiful things that we have. It's one of the things that gives me the greatest strength. Like, look how many of you, like, how much you care. You have two middle-aged men sitting in a podcast, talking, and it's the #1 Judaism podcast in about 15 countries in the world. Like, why? Because we're talking about Israel. And the Jewish people want to talk about, they care. You wake up in the morning and you're worried about Israel. You care about it. Like, that's such a beautiful thing. You're such powerful Genesis Jews. It's like you're committed to Israel, whether you agree with it or you don't. There's a place whereby to be a Jew is not dependent on what you do or you believe. It's who you are, and you embrace Jews as a given. Now, there is no doubt that Genesis Judaism diminishes to some degree the younger you get, which is a new phenomena in Jewish life, which we have to, and much of it is unique to North America. In Israel, Genesis Judaism is very alive from very early ages. But at the same time, to be a Jew is to be committed lovingly to the Jewish people, and to see being committed to the Jewish people as part of your religious life. It's the way we do Judaism. It's not the way we do nationalism. It's the Genesis covenant. But at the same time, the Exodus covenant says to be a Jew is not simply who you are, it's what you believe you have to become. Now, the conversation between those two is critical. Now, this is the Torah we have to learn. Because in Israel, if I push Exodus covenant and people feel that I'm endangering the Genesis covenant, they don't want to hear it. And I understand them, and they're right. Again, in this same research group, one person, his response to this peace conversation was, I used to be pro-peace, I'm not for peace anymore. That was his thing. So I said to him, why? Like, why? Why are you against? Like, what do you mean to be against peace? It's like, and he was very calm, against peace. I said, why? He says, because what we've learned on October 7th is that our primary responsibility has to be to Israel's security. So why do you think that that's antithetical to a commitment to peace? He says, well, look what happened. I said, true. But if I would say to you that my commitment to peace and to rights of Palestinians is something that I will only pursue, and I feel only morally obligated to pursue, to the extent that Israel's moral right to live safely in its homeland is first guaranteed. And that my commitment to peace is not some peace now disconnected from reality, but it's a commitment to an Israel that after it achieves, and on condition that it could achieve significant answers to its legitimate security concerns, believes that occupying another people is not who we want to be forever. and that we would like to live in peace as long as we could live. But living comes first. And it's not as if peace is a moral value as distinct from living. Those are two moral values. And he's sitting, and this man is an unbelievably intelligent person. And do you know what happened to him last year? He forgot. He literally couldn't even think about, like, I didn't say anything very profound right now. It's just sort of like the ABCs of our commitment to peace and security. Like, this is no big deal. Here, sitting opposite me, was one of the more intelligent, thoughtful people, educators you're going to meet. And since October 7th, he just forgot his Torah. He forgot his Exodusness and felt that you can't do Exodus now. And as if Genesis was, and commitment to the Jewish people was not a moral. So he had to choose. Do I want to do security or I want to do morality? That, by the way, is a key dichotomy prevalent in Israeli society. Do I want to do security or do I want to do morality? And I'm walking, and part of the Torah that I'm teaching right now, but it's not I, it's a whole team of people, is security is morality. When you make that dichotomy, the consequences are devastating. Because what do you mean? I'm not doing morality? Because once you give up on morality, once you stay in the moral discourse, then there's room to talk about. So whatever it's called. It's still Genesis and Exodus. But by the way, it's very different here in North America than in Israel. In Israel, Genesis is taken for granted. In North America, amongst ever large numbers of Jews, a Genesis commitment is contingent on having an Exodus Torah that they could respect. In North America, as we speak all the time, you have to choose your Genesis identity. You have to choose it. You have to choose whether you want to belong, to what degree you want to belong, how dominant your Jewish identity is as distinct from your American identity. You have exit possibilities. You have so many options. And you want to know, if I'm going to choose a family, I'm not born into a family. I don't inherit it. I have to choose it. And what Exodus Torah you communicate is very critical. What Exodus Torah Zionism is going to communicate is critical. For Israelis, the danger itself makes them all in.
So is there a way to bridge that gap between us? And what do you say to the next generation, both here and there?
First of all, there's always a way. You know me. We got to work. I just have to work. And what we have to work at is different. We have a lot of challenges that we didn't think we were going to have. So we just have to work harder. You know, we're going to give up on anything. I don't give up on anybody. I don't give up, and of course there's hope. But we have to do it differently. So when at the Institute, we recently had a convening of about 350 high school students in one of these programs that we're running called Wellspring. One of the things, we have this unbelievably skilled educator who's in charge of that program. He's really, really talented, of this high school initiative. And his Torah, which has helped us a lot, is very focused on speaking to young adults as if they're adults. Like, they have to feel your respect. Now, of course, it sounds nice, but actually doing it is complicated because they're a pain. It's not easy to respect teenagers. We can tell them how much we respect them, but to actually respect them is a challenge. He does. And he insists. So like before I come to teach, he preps me. And if he talks to me that way, he's talking to everybody else 10 times more. And it's just, and we see, when you speak to people and you don't tell them I have an answer to your questions, or you don't say to them there's something you don't understand, they understand very, very well. when you start a conversation with young adults, there's something that you don't understand, that I, in my infinite wisdom that I have acquired over the ages, would like to now bequeath to you, you're irrelevant. But if you speak to them straight, you legitimize their questions. You offer your truths, but don't claim that it is the truth. You challenge them to participate in a conversation. You assume the legitimacy of the choices that they have to make and get rid of the terms betrayal and boundaries. Then they might choose. And sometimes they choose because the Torah is inspiring. Very often they choose because the journey feels inspiring. Just the journey itself, to be part of it, because they still have a Genesis dimension, but just to be part of that story. To build a different Zionist conversation, which has to answer, and we're finding literally, again, we're not reaching the unreachables. Nobody is, by the way. We're not reaching the unreachables. There's obvious that we're reaching a certain level of commitment, otherwise you wouldn't come. But it's remarkable how responsive people are. So there's a methodology that you need here, and there's a completely different methodology that you need in Israel. But it also grows on respect. I meet with the seniors of Hartman schools, and there too, if they don't feel you respect, and part of what it is in Israel, you have to respect their fears. You have to respect their concerns. If they don't feel that you take their concerns seriously, they're not listening. So in each community, you have to work differently. But I do believe in the power of education. I would love it as if I had a marathon. I would love it if I had 30 years. I don't think we have 30 years. I think the consequences of not making significant progress over the next 5 years, 10 years, if that, will make the job of the next generation much, much harder. So is it bridgeable? Yes, but we need different Torahs, different issues. How they speak with each other is not going to be easy. It's not, and it's not people-to-people stuff. The problems are deeper than let's just go on a trip together. At the end, we have to get the Jewish people to have a shared vision of Zionism, a shared vision of what Israel means, a shared vision of what we have to stand for. And, now conservative reform denomination, those are easy. I could get Israelis, I could win, we won that. They still think reform is a curse word, but reforming is a way to insult somebody. But in practice, to accept that people have a right to live Jewishly differently, and those, I could, even if somebody comes in, I was recently in one of these groups, I'm schlepping all over Israel now, because we have these groups all over the country for leading college social activists. So it actually is a remarkable program. So I'm in Tel Aviv, and I told them, I said, I don't want a spectrum of Israelis. I want those for whom liberal Judaism and Israel as a Jewish democratic state are a given. They're a given. Because otherwise, the people on the extremes suck all the oxygen out of the room and you end up talking to them all the time instead of trying to build something. So they let one person into this group in Tel Aviv, which is a very left. He's from the settlement of Eli. He's a religious boy, beautiful boy from Eli. And they let him in, and I gave instructions. So first of all, you can give whatever instructions you want. People just decide. But they said, we thought about him. And he didn't fit the model exactly, but he kept on coming back and saying, I really want to be part of this conversation. He said, I want to be a part of it. I appreciate it. I do accept much of it, but I believe that I need to be in this conversation. And they decided we're going to let him in. So he sits, and my lecture was on pluralism, tolerance, and boundaries, something that it's in the book, and many of you heard me teach it. And I was talking about some of my own religious beliefs, which include the fact that conservative reform and secular Judaism are as authentic Judaisms as Orthodoxy is in my own mind. That I don't believe there's any value distinctions, that you could be an equally good Jew, whether you believe in secularism or which shul. They're all legitimate. You can be a crappy Orthodox Jew, and you could be a crappy secular Jew or crappy conservative. You could be mediocre in all of them, but that the best of them represent and could constitute a very valuable, meaningful life. So first of all, I see him sitting there, and he's very careful. I read body language. I see him moving, but he's very careful not to dominate the conversation. He comes up to me afterwards, and he says, but how could you say that somebody who's not halachic is of equal value to you as a halachic Jew? He says, now, I'm not denying, he said, this is their right to do so. He says, I'm not denying they have every right to do so, and I'll support their choices, but I don't want to say they're legitimate. So I said, great, you believe in tolerance towards them. And said, that's a victory. Here it is. We have a politically right-wing elite settler, like tolerance. So it's not all pluralism. Those issues were there. It's these other issues that the gaps are more significant. But that's for those of you who thought that we were going to coast the waves of Startup Nation and sort of ride our horses into the sunset of Zionism's great success. And many of us thought that. Maybe that's, when we talk about the conception of before October 7th, there was a conception that things are okay. And that, we do have to work on the occupation and Palestinian statehood, but they're really difficult and it's not really in our hands. And we're sort of managing a lot of stuff, and Israel's growing and getting stronger and more vibrant, and it's demographic. There's so many problems that we face that we weren't going to face anymore. And I know Iran was in the background, but most of us, besides Yossi, didn't really think about it. And so there was this sort of a nachas period that we were going to work, but there wasn't and I saw it even amongst many of our donors. The front line was Jewish identity in America. In Israel, we're good. Pluralism, we gave to that already. We did pluralism. There was sort of that feeling. And it's not, we have a lot of work to do. And we're going to do it. And we will be successful. But it's going to be a profoundly challenging, but at the same time, also a profoundly rewarding time. So, are you okay, Josh?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the...
Oh, I'll do that. You don't have to, Chris, like this. We want more, we appreciate more subtlety at the Hartman Institute. I do subtlety. That was pretty unique. You're going to be challenged. Lovers of Israel are going to be challenged. Whether you're really going to be in it for the difficult years that are lying before us. I'm all in. I hope you'll be in.
So I have one final question, but Josh really does seem anxious to get a few from you. So Josh, if you would like to call on, is there somebody? Jesse has the microphone, and I think we can take one or two questions.
I'm the non-subtle director of Boston, starting again in June. I've met a bunch of you already over the last few months, and I do want to welcome you here again. Thank you so much for coming. If there are any questions, please raise your hand.
So I think we have time for just one or two. That's maybe one. Jesse, Paula Apsel.
Thank you. So I really want to talk about the hostages because I think we just think about them, and especially today. So I've heard it said by Israeli friends that if Israel doesn't do something about the hostages to get more of them home, hopefully alive, that somehow it will change something very fundamental in Israel, that this feeling that people can ultimately rely on the government to come and get them when they get into trouble for the sake of the Jewish people. I'd like to know what your view is on that.
First of all, thank you very much for that question. I think that's broken already. I think it's broken. I just in general avoid the language, the Humpty Dumpty language, that something's going to get broken and it's never going to get rebuilt again. I think something is broken. The fact that hostages could be politicized and that people very openly have turned their families into enemies. And even like the fact that for many people, they're a problem. There's a brokenness. Now, for some people, we have to realize Gilad Shalit was also a very traumatic moment in Israeli society. Very traumatic. For Gilad to come home, we let out 1,000+ people, including Sinwar. That I could love Israel and feel responsible for everybody, but it doesn't mean that I could solve that problem. It's a legitimate issue. But after 424 days, I think it is already acceptable among certain segments in Israel to forget about them. And that already broke something. That broke something. The fact that people could say, I'm not responsible for things that, there was this strange moment I had when the Minister of Transport of England resigned because 10 years ago she said, you don't get this in America, we get it in Israel. She claimed that her telephone was stolen, and it wasn't. She just resigned 10 years ago because she falsely reported a stolen telephone. And no one's even thinking of resigning after October 7th. It's somebody else's fault. The military is going to resign. The Secret Service are going to resign. The Chief of Intelligence already resigned. The head of 8200 already resigned. And by the time they all resigned, the politicians were able to say, you see, all those who were responsible resigned. I'm not responsible. And for a 10-year-old, something that she did about a phone, she just resigned. Something's broken. But nothing is ever broken forever. For the families, it's broken. You can't repair that. We're going to need different politicians. I spoke about this once in one of the podcasts. I'm not advocating for Bennett or not for Bennett. You like his politics, not. But when Bennett and Yair Lapid were prime ministers, they visited the homes of Israelis whose kids were killed and exposed themselves to horrific attacks by the families. And I remember Bennett sitting there, and this family in Beersheba was attacking him. And they said, "What do you respond?" And he said, "A victim's family has a right to say to me whatever they want to say." And he stood there stoically and just accepted it. We need politicians like that. Politicians who realize that their job is to serve the people. And it's not the job of the people to revalidate and to serve them. And so I think, my friend, what's your name? Paula. I think it's already broken. But it could be rebuilt. It can be rebuilt. And I hope that even without great commitment, some people will come home. I hope. But part of the rebuilding that we're going to have is going to also have to be on that. On what does it mean? What does solidarity mean? What does responsibility mean? It's part of the Torah that we're going to have to look at. Now, there's going to be a Torah that we don't agree with. It's going to be there. The question will be, which Torah is going to win? Which Torah is going to be the majority, and which Torah is going to form the primary discourse of the country? Right now, there's a competition. You're not going to convert the unconvertibles, but there's a cultural struggle over which idea and which type of Jewish values and compassions are going to win. I would just tell you, it could get rebuilt, but it's going to be our responsibility to rebuild it.
So, Donniel, thank you so much for being with us
Thank you all
tonight. And just one final word from you. What can we here in Boston do? And can you leave us with one word of hope or possibility?
You're leaving before I give you hope. You have to, again, I want to quote my colleague Tal Becker, who says that in every generation, that which seems impossible in the next generation seems to be inevitable. It's not going to be easy. And you have a whole Pekala here too. You have a lot of stuff which, thank God, we didn't speak about tonight. You have a hard time in front of you too. And the only hope I could give you is to please remember that if you have hope, we win. It's when you don't have hope that reality becomes hopeless. So what do I have hope? I have hope in the Jewish people's ability to hope. And I have no doubt that we're going to win. But we have to be honest about the challenges we face if we're going to know what to do. And so keep on being serious. Keep on expecting work, and don't expect immediate solutions. Be mature lovers of Israel. And the mature lovers of Israel are those who built our country. And if you thought you could retire, you can't. You can't. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. Laila Tov lekulam.